So many of us are beginning to reconnect with our food and learn more about perhaps our food cultures, where they came from. Of course, the holidays are coming, so it's wonderful to be able to think about traditional foods and possibly even how our food culture has changed through a number of different circumstances. And I am just absolutely delighted to have my guest today here to talk with us about the meaning of food and how we incorporate that into our lives, our family culture, et cetera. But first, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about her, because really I could fill the whole hour talking about how fabulous she is. Tammera Karr has a whole bunch of letters after her name: Ph.D, BCHN, CGP, CNW. She has 20 plus years of clinical experience. She's an author, she's an educator, she's a food historian, and she is a researcher. She's passionate about nutrition as the key to stopping many modern illnesses. Tammera first authored Our Journey with Food in 2015 and the expanded second edition in 2018. And then Our Journey with Food cookery book followed after that. Believing traditional foods is all about community, Tammera went on to create Our Journey with Food's online education in 2020. And she creates education for nurses who want to use food as medicine, for holistic nutrition professionals. And it is always a delight to talk with her and to learn from her. Tammera, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me, Mira. It's always so much fun to talk with you. You're a family member now.
Oh, thank you. And I think the thing that I love is you and I are both so excited, not just about food, but about the provenance of food, where it comes from, how it got into our diet, or how it's been modified in usage in our diet. And you are such a wonderful researcher, and you have such a lovely way of sharing this information. Like, your books are far from dry dust, academic tomes.
Well, that's good, because we need, the whole thing with food is it's a conversation. And it's a conversation about our personal lives, about our culture, about our health, so many different things. And if it's dry and dusty, then, we gag it down and we cough and sputter over it. If it's juicy, tasty morsels that are inspiring and full of flavor, then it becomes part of us. And since we wouldn't be here without food, it makes sense for this conversation to be a little juicier and more flavorful than a dry tome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I absolutely love, so I have a digital copy of your second edition of this wonderful book. And so the full title is Our Journey with Food Cookery Book, Celebrating 150 Years of Cookery, Magic, and Cultural Connection. And I think one of the things that I loved so much about the first book, and I'm sure that I haven't even had a chance to really dive in yet, but the second book expands on how much we have these different connections that come. So many of the things that I have learned from you when you've lectured at conferences that I've been at or whatever is that whole cultural piece, how we truly are the product of generations that have come from different places and then possibly cultures that have combined. Can you talk about the resonance that happens when we consume those cultural foods?
I can, but I want to start with a little piece of history, because we think about this conversation in our terms, in where we're sitting here today. But one of the books that I have been gifted with that's come into my library is called European and American Cuisine, and it's 1906 is the date on it. It's not yesterday's edition, but in the preface of this book, the author wrote, what science can boast of having done more for the happiness of humanity and the advances of the culture and civilization of the world than the art of. And this message doesn't just start in 1906. I found these same thoughts dating back 70 years later in manuscripts, where the value of food was reiterated over and over again, that a chef is a gentleman that brings knowledge to the table, all of these kinds of things. And not only do our cells carry the memories of our ancestors, but the genetic information we're gaining today shows us that we begin developing flavors for our culture, knowledge of our cultural foods, flavors in the womb. So if a mother is eating her cultural foods, her child is not only learning the language, but the nuances of the language, but the taste of the foods that are being prepared. So how sad is it that our children today are being born with the flavor of McDonald's or Kentucky Fried Chicken or Chick-fil-A, and it's triple shot of MSG as the flavor versus what might have been fabulous Greek food or food from India or the food of the Jewish culture instead. It's just.
And one of the things that I will say that I have seen in my own client base that has come out of the pandemic is more people are returning to the kitchen. Maybe perhaps not as much as their grandparents did, but they're like, yeah, I know, like they've got more time at home, so they might as well do something with it. And the other thing is that restaurants were closed, fast food was closed. They had to learn, in order to feed themselves, they had to learn how to go back to the kitchen. And a lot of people are discovering that they really enjoy it, that there is this magic of putting flavors together and really learning to appreciate a meal rather than just being this drive-through experience.
And it's really been multiple generations. The spouse that was responsible for cooking, and we like to think it was all the woman's world, but that's really a construct of the 1950s idea of the little lady back in the house. But whether it was the chuck wagon cook who rode with the cattle crews, or whether it was the men from China who developed stir fry cooking for the railroad industry, or it was the Jewish woman who taught us how to make latkes, which in this edition of our Journey with Food Cookery book, this is how big it is. On the start of the chapter about roots and tubers, there's this beautiful section written by you on, as a child, I loved how our extended family would gather at my aunt's house for the holidays. And not only are you sharing your memories about traditional foods in here, but we've also found through the research that people will smell these things from their memories, or they will begin to salivate. And so when we're having these conversations, really serves us to also understand the terminology and the technology. And many of our folks that are going back into the kitchen, they don't understand the terminology, the difference between frying and braising, the difference between sautéing and frying. And so it became obvious, and it's one of the reasons why we're seeing more programs coming out that are about traditional cooking, is that people don't have the knowledge anymore on what we used to do. And the cookbooks don't contain the knowledge of what used to be in there. How do you divide a recipe? How do you make your own sweetened condensed milk? What's the difference between a fricasseing and braising? Now, you know that because you've been cooking your whole life and because your mom was a chef. But most people, they hear you say fricasseing and they think you're pulling a word out of your imagination. What
sound real? Yeah.
Yeah. What difference does it matter where you put food in the refrigerator and how old the food is? And I know for your culture, there's some really strict guidelines on this, the preparing and the combining of foods. But how many people in America know about the Janis in India that are the strictest form of vegetarians, where you don't eat after dark because insects may be damaged by the light that is in, or the flame from what you're cooking. They don't do honey. They won't eat anything but terrestrial plants that grow above the ground, that they can be harvested without that, because it's an annual plant that would die anyways. And so when we get to having these conversations with students and friends and colleagues and family, it's important to know these things because they're part of our history, they're part of our culture. And America is this amazing mulligan stew, as it used to be called, of people, but we've never had a food culture, which also means that by the 1950s, there wasn't an emphasis on being able to cook for yourself, let alone cook with real foods. And by 1960, we had the influence of people like Peg Bracken came in, which launched the industrial food that you and I have so many choice words about. And it's been since then, it's been demeaning for you to spend your time in the kitchen, in the home. In every century prior to this, the home, the role of the good wife was the most important role. And our generation has probably spent a lot of time apologizing for the idea that we like to cook and take care of these things that are at home.
Sure. And I think it's interesting because you bring up a point. There is no unifying theory. And so what happens is we tend to swing from one direction to another as we get co-opted by what food producers think should be or appears to be the newest fad, latest, greatest trend, whatever. And
those words are important. The fad, the trend. That's probably as close as we come to a food tradition in the United States is fads and trends. And what you and I are talking about is not a fad or a trend. It's what makes it possible for us to be here today. Because without real nourishment, without these foods that have guided our culture, we wouldn't have the technology and the ability to do what we're doing.
And I think one of the other things that's so important, and what I love so much about the work that you do, is it's not inaccessible. It's just that we've lost connection. And so by sharing the stories, by sharing the information about where things come from, about how we moved through the transitions of different cultures and even cultures combining, which certainly happens when cultures come together. Also, I think one of the things I love is the joy that you bring to understanding how food is more than just what we put in our mouth. It's like a multisensory experience, and it's meant to be a communal experience. And think about how much more fun we have when we eat with others, if we're at a party or a gathering, or even just one other person. And that in turn, as you and I both know from the work we do, improves digestion, helps us feel better. There's so many reasons why food is such an important part of daily living and healthy, holistically healthy living as well.
You know, there's research that shows when people eat alone, their incidences of depression and chronic illness and chronic pain significantly increases, because that's not normal for us. Some people may be offended, but we're really herd animals. We like to be together. And then there's those of us that like to be out on the fringes, and we come in and say hi every once in a while, and then we like to be left alone. But we've been eating together since God created us. We've not eaten in a test tube isolated. And our food comes from a very similar thing. It's also interconnected. We're learning about how the mycelial of the forest is all interconnected and looks like the human neurotransmitter pathways. And how these things feed us on so many different levels and stimulate us in ways that we're not even aware of. This is part of what we've been doing, is looking at things through a lens too small. We've been looking at it through the Newtonian view of reduce everything down. And that's where we've gotten to where our food is. Oh, you don't have enough vitamin A, we'll just put some synthetic vitamin A in, and you need X amount of carbohydrates and you need X amount of fat, but we can make that fat from anything because these are easier to break down and manipulate. But that's not the way nature works. It's not the way we work. And our whole biochemistry is designed to do things with other people. And the research shows that you develop failure to thrive, and children or elderly people, their health begins to fail because of not having the connection, whether it's around a table or whether it's around a tailgate. It doesn't matter. We're intended to eat together, to share what's before us. And one of the things I've been talking with my students about that are working with low-income families, which for you and I, this is probably a no-brainer, but for them, it's about pooling resources. I tell them, in my generation, the family came together. Grandma had stuff she was growing in the garden because she had time to do it. And somebody else brought stuff from the creamery where they were working. You mentioned potlucks, and we pooled things together, and then we had greater bounty, which added to not only food security, but resiliency. It allowed us to have more in times of depletion, like famines and the Great Depression. And we've got people starving to death in inner cities and people going hungry and malnourished in urban areas because they either don't know they can pool their resources or don't have anybody to do that with. This is how people have always made it through times and challenges, is taking basic information and creating a bounty out of it. That's how your immigrant family and my immigrant family made it to where we are today, is they didn't have anything, but
and I think I want to go back to something that you were talking about a minute ago about how the industrial food complex has really taken over, co-opted a lot of how we eat. And a lot of it was presented as time saving and let us handle your nutrition for you kind of thing. And one of the biggest changes that came along the way with that is the whole concept of home ec. Like I talk a lot about this in my community. When I was a kid, everybody, boys and girls, had to take home ec. We had to learn knife skills. We had to learn like how to cook from scratch. By the time my oldest child went, they were not teaching knife skills, and they were learning how to make things that were partially from scratch. 7 years later, by the time my youngest kid went, it was not mandatory class. It was something that you could take if you wanted to, but you didn't have to. And they were using whack and bake dough to make pigs in a blanket. And that was considered cooking, which you add all those things in and it really gets very overwhelming because you're not truly learning how to interact with, utilize, and appreciate your food. And so I want to ask you, with this beautiful tome that you've created, what is something that you're hoping will help people shift to appreciate the value of everyday food? Real food, that is.
Real food, the value of real food. This is why we put the principles in this time. Every section has principles in it. And our very first principle that we list is food knowledge and culinary skills must be taught to children and adults in order to improve health outcomes. And there's science to support that. If we don't teach people, and which has always been done, every person on the planet learned from somebody else what foods to pick, what foods to store, what foods to cook, how to cook them. And we've now got 4 generations of people in the United States. And this was unique to us, but now it is spreading like a cancer. We have 4 generations of people who have no clue what's involved with food growth, preservation, cooking. They know nothing about the food. And we are now also seeing robotics move into the food industry. So there are all of those unintended consequences of our food being made solely by machines instead of by us, which is unprecedented in human history, that the food has not been selected and prepared and eaten by a human. And what are we going to lose? The quality is going to be number one. The advent of more illnesses because of foodborne diseases and parasites, because a machine isn't going to recognize the mouse material or the dead bugs or the hair or how many other things that are allowable amounts in the food industry because it's being done by machines. And then there's those, when we start talking about other aspects that pull us into the realm of Goethean science and quantum physics, what's the energy of the food? There's so many people have said to me and tell stories throughout the cookbook about the food that their grandmother made and how no matter how hard they worked to do it, it never quite tasted like their grandmother's or their mother's, or the smell in the kitchen that was mouth-watering that you try and replicate, but you're not sure why it was like that. When we start looking at things on food and chemical constructs on those kinds of levels, we're talking quantum physics and how the energy of those foods are affecting us on cellular levels. And while some might say, oh, this is just maybe all, there's more and more research showing that there's all of this stuff going on a quantum level that we're not even aware of, that affects not only our microbiome and our mitochondria, but it goes for generations. Studies that show the foods that somebody ate 3 generations ago or the trauma they went through 3 generations ago becomes part of the grandchild and how they cope and deal with stress. And so we're at a really interesting time where our history answers a lot of questions for us about how important it is to make food a particular way. It's not just the what, it's the how. And our ancestors didn't need quantum physics to tell them that when you crush garlic and you let it rest in the air for a little bit, the flavor of the food is better. Somebody figured it out and somebody copied it and they kept doing it, and it became a cellular knowledge that this is how you prepared garlic. Just topics about trichinosis. I was having a conversation with some friends this last week about increased rates of trichinosis in wild game meat. And I thought, I just put a thing from 1930 something or other, farm extension in the meat section of this cookery book about trichinosis in pork and how these are things that most people aren't aware of now. And yet you heard trichinosis, you were aware of it for more than one reason because you took home economics. And that was common knowledge in the 50s and 60s still. So when we start turning everything over to machines, there's so much we lose. I don't know if we can really quantify yet how much we lose by taking food to that level and out of the level here within us.
And I would argue that it's not just the physics, it's the biology. Because when we pick crops that are underripe so that we can hold them and force ripen them with ethylene gas, nutritionally, they're deficient. They don't taste as good. We lose that cultural connection to the flavors, the aromas that are inherent in the food, as well as the nourishment. When, the industry is raising animals as quickly as possible and slaughtering them as early as possible, it sounds a little bit challenging to think about, but a cow, for example, is supposed to be reared traditionally for a couple of years before it's processed. And these days they want to process them quicker and quicker because that's how they make money. But then that means if they're going to process them that more quickly, they have to raise that many more because they need that many more. And then we have confined feeding operations, which are terrible for the cows. It's just heartbreaking if you've ever driven past one. And that, I believe, gets transferred to what we consume. And in addition to that, we also know that there are so many recipes that call for a pot roast is meant to be made with a roast, not like a tender piece. It's meant to be made with a tougher piece of meat that you let cook for hours, and the flavors meld together and you get the nutrition out of it. It's just, I don't know. I think we also lose when we try to do everything food on speed dial, as it were.
And food on speed dial is unfortunately sweeping through the world because everybody wants to be like Americans. And I'm very blessed that I have had students from Ukraine and Lebanon and India this year, which have shown me that how hard the young generation is now working to regain or preserve their cultural foods. If we preserved our cultural foods in the 60s and 70s and 80s, we were like, man, get with it. This is modern times. And you said something about ease and convenience. That was part of it is our food, our tang, everybody wants to be an astronaut. It was science, better living through science. And nobody stopped saying the Dow Chemical Company's motto. They've even reworded it, but that's still part of our generation's mindset. But the younger generation is looking to be more of do-it-yourselfers and embracing things, but they have to have the knowledge. And if nobody preserves the knowledge, then they're having to reinvent the wheel. And I said to my students this morning, Americans like to think they've reinvented the wheel, but they don't realize they're running on a flat tire on a warped wheel.
I like that. That's
so instead of that, we have all of these wonderful foods and we can come together around a table without conflict. It doesn't matter if you're eating keto or paleo or vegan, or if you're eating plant-based, whatever kind of label you feel you want on your food, that doesn't matter. What it matters is the quality of the food and the care that's gone into it. And that community, that connection that happens around the table. And we find more common. It was great sitting here looking at 395 some plus recipes over this 150 years and 26 countries that we've included, and seeing that there was far more in common than different with all of us. And then how much more resilient that makes us, because we're not alone anymore. We're not doing the fight all by ourselves. And we can enjoy things without the guilt and the burden because we're sitting at the table with our friends.
And that's so wonderful. And I love how you've tied it together. You back it up with science, but then you bring it home with that connection and those ideas to really help people begin to reconnect with their roots and to hopefully also lay the foundation for future generations. I think that's just truly wonderful.
I think we're in an age right now too where people need permission. I don't know how we got here, but somehow or another, we seem to think we need permission to take back control of our health. And we're looking to all kinds of things, whether I saw in the research just this week that they are developing an Ebola. Moderna is an Ebola shot that is including CRISPR technology and the mRNA technology with bacteria. And I'm thinking, I remember from 7th grade science class how quickly bacteria and viruses grow and expand. and live their life
Intake,
cycles
yeah.
are. Yeah. And I'm thinking, what are the unintended consequences? Now,
Mhm.
you and I look closer to home and we see the advent of synthetic herbicides and synthetic fertilizers and how the CRISPR gene has affected our food supply on a very personal level. But when we start letting technology take the human, us, out of the equation, what will be the unintended consequences down the road? And by having basic knowledge, like we're talking about in the cookery book, the knowledge that's in Empty Plate about the food sustainability and mindfulness connection, the more of the history of food and what its nutrients are that are part of our journey with food, when we bring that all together into one massive book of knowledge for each of us, in many respects, we're looking at, it's all foundational information that allows us to go forward in humanity instead of declining, because humanity has a tendency of expanding and then collapsing. The Roman Empire, the Syrian Empire, great empires have fallen. And why have they fallen? When we look at the history, it's because of the food. One of the leading factors in the fall of the Roman Empire was their trade deficit to China for wheat, because they gave everyone a measure of grain was their due. You get your bag of wheat, I get my bag of wheat. This is what we get as being citizens of Rome. And the population had reached a point that the Roman Empire could no longer pay the debt to another country and no longer could bring the food in. And it began disintegrating. And you, of course, had massive amounts of food toxicity with the lead-lined tubs that sauces were made out of in dishes. When we look at that, and go, oh, those people were silly. Blah, blah, blah. How could they do that? But how is the inclusion of chemicals and robotics in our modern food supply that you talk so much about, how is that any different?
Now we've just traded, sure, we know that heavy metals are not good for us, but we've decided that some of these other things are okay. And I'm sure down the road, someone's going to be like, what were they thinking? But right now, it's grass, generally recognized as safe, which in and of itself is not a great thing.
Let's talk about, just when we look at that alone, MSG, how did they determine what the generally recognized as safe was? It was a small portion in one thing based on one serving. You and I both know that nobody is going to eat just 4 chips, but that's a serving size. And so therefore that serving amount of MSG is fine, or hydrolyzed vegetable protein, or whatever the chemical may be. And there's over 10,000 of them a year put on the market.
There's so many.
And so that's one thing. But what happens when your entire food supply 3 times, 4 times a day for 4 generations contains that? And you're not
no way to keep track of how much you're getting. It's not like they list the parts per million on the package. So you have no way of, even if you wanted to calculate how much am I getting, if you are reading the ingredient panel, is that it's in there. And again, so that just highlights the beauty of reconnecting back to real food, choosing options, like really understanding the history, the culture, the connection, the recipes, and really being able to come back to a deep rooted cultural nourishing of the body. And like I said, community, and hopefully future generations as well.
Yeah. And all of this leads towards resiliency, because if we don't have resiliency, you and I both, I mean, we all know people that have had more than 1 or 2 trials and troubles in their life. And we look at some of these people and we think, wow, how is it they have such a wonderful attitude? How is it they're not on all these antidepressant drugs and aren't battling with all of these illnesses? How come this person, with all the stuff that's happened to them, seems so vital? always at the peak of their performance as a human. And me, I can just barely get out of bed. I'm depressed. One thing or another. That's the difference. Our peak performances as humans isn't about our athletic prowess. It's about our resiliency and all of those components that build up that resiliency, whether it's the microbiome, the virome, the mycobiome, the oxygen around us, whatever it is. And we have had resiliency because of this very intimate, life-sustaining relationship with food until now.
Yeah. Tammera, this has just been so fascinating. And for everybody who's listening, I highly encourage you to get the book. It is wonderful. I love to read cookbooks. This is even deeper than that because there's so much more wonderful information in there. It's not just the recipes, tons of fabulous stuff. I'll put the link to all your books down below. But if someone wanted to connect with you a little bit more deeply, where would they find you?
They will find me at yourwholenutrition.com is my website, and they can connect me directly through that. And they can find the books on amazon.com. So they're all there. And anyone who wants an autographed copy, fingers crossed, the shipment from the publisher will be here this week, because the digital copy is now live. People can buy it directly off of the website. But the print copies, I had to have it sent to my son in Montana to pick it up at his house. I had to buy it off of Amazon because it was 3 weeks before the publisher would get me the print copies. So it was quite interesting. And just as to show the original Our Journey with Food, it's about 240 pages. And we thought this was pretty cool when it came out. In comparison to the size, this is how much more information.
Massively expanded. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. That's fabulous.
And I have to thank you, Mira, because you not only wrote the opening to the tubes and roots chapter with your story about latkes and stuff, but we also used your information at the start of one of our chapters about travel food at the back. And so thank you so much for being a contributor to this, and not only recipes, your family's, your mom's, what is it, her cobbler? Yeah. I'm sorry if I didn't remember exactly.
But I'm sure there's a lot of recipes floating around in there, but thank you so much for including me. And I love the work you do. I am in awe of your research and communication abilities, and I'm truly delighted to count you not only as a colleague, but as a friend. So thank you.
Thank you. Did you have some way you wanted to wrap up, or can I read the poem that starts the book off?
I would love it if you would do that. That would be the perfect ending.
It's called Hidden Delights, which is really what food is for us. It brings so much in. I hold a perfect blackberry in my hand and reflect on all the hands that have done this before me. The woman in the skin garment or gingham, the child with sun-bleached hair, or the work-hardened hands of a man. Wild animals have gingerly picked and torn free the fruits of the earth equally. As I savor the sweet tartness of the berries, I'm scolded by the blue jay and gray squirrel for beating them to the last of summer's hidden delights. Unlike those of old days, hunger is not what stops me at the berry patch. It is connection and preservation of knowledge. Do not forget the bounty of the earth, a quiet voice on the breeze whispers to me, nor the pure joy in hidden delights.
Oh, that is so lovely. Thank you so much for sharing your brilliance and your wisdom with us. Thank you for that beautiful poem, and truly thank you for this amazing book. I appreciate you.
Thank you, Mira. And you are doing such fabulous work that any way I can help, let me know.
Thank you. Thanks, folks, for listening in to this fun conversation. Please make sure that you click, like, subscribe down below, stay connected, and I will have all of the information down there for you. Take care.